Hello, everybody. This is G, and you're listening to the SITREP podcast, your home for everything modern military gaming. And today, joining us at the command table is Ralph from England.
Morning, folks.
And
Afternoon for you.
And we have Jim all the way from sunny Florida.
Hello, everybody.
So, Chris is up in Great White North of Canada, and I think he got some snow, and hopefully we'll be able to cut him in later at some point. I know he's running back and forth between a few different jobs, so we are definitely going to try and get him in the show, whether we cut him in later at some point. But for now, we want to thank you for being with us today. I know we're kind of off our regular time track, but due to the Easter weekend holiday, we decided to give the crew the weekend off, so we are 1 week later than normal. That's okay. Everybody deserves a little bit of holiday time. Speaking of holiday time, Ralph, have you gotten any chance to do any kind of hobbying over the last couple of weeks?
A little bit of painting. Seems I'm doing my Spetsnaz up in multicam, so I've just done one of the Spectre Spetsnaz with the PKM kneeling, and I built and primed black my Tiger from Empress for them, so they have a vehicle ready as well.
Yeah, it looks really good.
I haven't got around to building the T14 yet, but that'll be the last thing I do, and then give that a blast with some different colours, possibly. Maybe do it in the straight Russian armour green. That's all the pictures are, but I've seen some other pictures of people doing it in some sort of camo. So, and I might actually try zenithing it as well, zenith priming it. So,
okay,
to help with it. So, we'll see what happens with it.
So,
it's a nice piece of resin.
Yeah, it looks good from the pictures I've seen. So, what is your plan with these vehicles?
They'll be, the Tiger will be part of the spec, will be for the Russians for Spectre, and the T14 might be part of that, or it might just be an objective piece. I haven't decided yet, or it might actually go into ultra combat in that terms of, because that's going to be vehicles and infantry. So
yeah,
so that might be the point. It was just to add a piece of heavy armor to the minis, because I haven't actually got a modern piece of heavy armor. I've got a warrior primed, but that was for Sangin, so I haven't got an Op 4 piece of heavy armor, so I decided to get a T14.
Perfect. Yeah. Excellent.
It is a really nice piece of kit, though. It really is a nice model.
So you're thinking of using it more as an objective piece than an actual playable piece in the game at this point, at least.
Yeah. At least to a point. I mean, it depends on the type of game. You know, if the game demands that we have, heavy vehicles, then, you can roll the T14 in. But then it's looking in the spec out rules going, what type of tank is it? Because they have got different types of tank. They've got the standard sort of main battle tank, and they've got the new type of battle tank with the armor. So it depends just what type it is. But of course, there's not a lot of information about the T14, is there?
No. Yeah, you're right on that.
To say the T90 and the T90 and T72s and stuff, because the T14, from what I gather, hasn't actually been used in combat anywhere. I don't think they've rolled down into Syria. I don't think the Russians have been putting them into Syria. So,
not that I'm aware of now.
We'll see what happens.
Awesome. Anything else? Have you been doing any of the Division 2 gaming?
Well, I'm max level on Division 2, so I'm been doing some of the what's called invasion points from their PMC villainish faction called the Black Tusk. So been blasting around on that, but it's just I haven't really got a lot of time at the moment. Work is sort of piling up, shall we say? So
yeah, damn work! It's always getting in the way of the good stuff.
Yeah. Life gets in the way of hobbies. So
yeah, exactly. Okay, excellent. All right, Jim, you're up. So what have you been up to hobby wise?
A lot of work as well, but make it work somehow. On top of that, episodes of the Op Center. So we've been doing some Air War C21 gaming. We actually had a live stream on that a little while ago that I think went pretty well.
Yeah, that was really fun.
Well, I figured you would say such, as you shot down all three of my Mirages and didn't even get your Harriers scratched once, but that's okay. That's actually how most of the air battles went in that conflict. In fact, in most of the Air War C21 scenarios they give you for the Falklands rule supplement or scenario supplement. Usually, if the British lose a single Harrier, that's game. Because as a player, if you've lost at least one Harrier, you've already done in air-to-air combat. You've already done worse than the historical outcomes were. So, in a historical model game, you've technically already lost.
Yeah.
Just by losing one Harrier. No Harriers were lost in air-to-air combat in that conflict. So we're doing some Air War C-21. I'm also trying to figure out Naval Command by Rory Crabb to do some of the more large-scale operational level air, land, and sea combined arms stuff that took place during the Falklands, again, to support the future parts of the Op Center series. The jury's still out on that system. I haven't really tried it yet, and I'm having some difficulty making it work. There seems to be some conflict between different editions of the game. The charts that are with the base game do not line up with the charts that are in the Falkland supplement, and at pretty fundamental levels, like literally how many damage points each ship has and how damage points even work in that game. So it'll probably work, but I have a little bit of work to do on that one still. Air War C-21 still going great. I'm also building counters for Paras, Commandos, and Argentinian conscripts for Valor and Victory Falklands to get the ground war going on that conflict.
Uh-huh.
And pretty much just everything Falklands.
Awesome.
For Op Center and for weekend gaming going forward.
Awesome. I have to say, I watched your first episode of the Op Center, and I learned a lot. A lot of stuff. I'm not really familiar up with the Falklands. I vaguely remember it when I was a kid being on the news, but outside of that, I didn't really know a lot about it. And what I found amazing was that in the initial stages, the Argentinians actually captured the Royal Marines that were on the island at the time and sent them home, which I thought was very interesting, instead of holding on to them. So, that war kind of begins by accident, and it begins in stages. So, again, there were political movements in the British Parliament or whatever that had been kind of rejected, but I won't get into all the politics of it. But the idea that the Falklands were 100% British was not really 100% accepted by everyone, even in Great Britain itself. I think the war has kind of calcified that into they're definitely the British, because now there's been a war fought over, and the British obviously resoundingly won that war. So now there's no question. But at the time, they weren't even full British citizens. There was a small political movement even in the UK to kind of, almost like Hong Kong, kind of lease these islands back to the Argentinians eventually. So the Argentinians reached out and grabbed them. Didn't think that the British were going to send a big task force down. They didn't think a big war was going to start. Uh-huh.
So in the interest of kind of keeping things as cool as possible, they treated these prisoners pretty well. They sent them back immediately. Like, some of them went back in time to come back and take part in the counter invasion, and they sent them right home. There was no, Hanoi Hilton in Buenos Aires by any stretch of the imagination. They were home, right off the bat. Because, again, I think the Argentinians didn't expect a big war to go on. The Americans were still involved as third-party negotiators. Everybody was trying to keep this war from happening. So, at least in that first part of April, when the Argentinians pulled their stunt in South Georgia and also the Falklands, they were being very, very cool as far as, sending back prisoners, not, conducting any kind of reprisal against any of the civilians in there, doing anything like that. Because, again, they were trying to keep that war from really getting started. It's not until the sinking of the Belgrano. We'll get into that in part 3 of the series. The series is now going to be 4 parts instead of 3. It just wasn't going to fit in 3 parts.
Excellent.
It's not until the sinking of the Belgrano. That's the Argentinian light cruiser by HMS Conqueror. That's a British nuclear powered submarine. That it's now officially a real war, and there's all peace hopes diplomacy, embassies, everything just straight out dies. 368 people died aboard the Belgrano, and it's still a major, major thing in Argentina. There's also a lot of political and diplomatic issues about whether or not that attack was justified or whatever. Obviously, the British have one position, the Argentinians have another. But once that ship goes down with that many people, dying, that was May 2nd, so almost a full month later. Okay, now it's a war, and prisoners aren't going home until the issue's resolved one way or the other. But up until then, people were really holding out hope that this wasn't going to turn into a big thing.
Sure.
So prisoners were going back. Nobody was getting, kicked around. Nobody was getting handcuffed to a chair in a basement or anything. Things were being handled very, very politely up until that point.
Excellent. So I have to ask, up to this point, what game system is your favorite as far as this theater of battles that you've experienced, have played, or have researched, that you're either played or looking forward to playing?
Well, if I can get Naval Wars, I keep calling it that, Naval Command by Rory Crabb, if I can get that system to work, that's going to be a great one. I can't really give that one a fair review yet because, again, I haven't actually gotten a chance to really crack it open and play it yet.
Uh-huh.
So far, Air War C-21 is definitely awesome. I mean, Valor and Victory is always great. But Air War C-21 really does a pretty good job at, without getting into super technical, how many megahertz, what's the frequency of the radar, like down to the super technical details. It's very, but at the same time, it really shows the flight characteristic differences and the technological differences, and that's going to affect the tactical differences. I mean, as you experienced with your Harriers. My Mirages could do things that your Harriers could not do, and vice versa. And so without a whole bunch of special rules or silly cards or stat lines or, these kind of, top-down, force you to play by this way, kind of rules that a lot of game systems tend to impose on us these days. The game gives you these aircraft. You learn very, very quickly what they're good at, what they're not good at, and so you adapt your own tactics. And because the game is realistic enough, the realism of your tactics become almost an emergent property. Pretty soon, you're playing the way the British really flew those Harriers, the way the Argentinians really flew those Mirages, not because the game told you to, but because the game was able to show you how those aircraft really behave, and your answers to the problem, so to speak, become the same answers as the people on the scene, vicariously, of course. And before you know it, you're actually, recreating small parts of the Falklands War.
Awesome. Sitting here listening to you talk, just an idea popped in my head, and I'm sending this challenge out to all three of us, four of us technically with Chris. I'll talk to him about this offline. Maybe at some point we should explore some type of review of a game or rule system, like a small short video or some kind of posting or something, obviously between series of Op Center and Ghost Ops and things like that. But I know people out there would be very interested in hearing reviews of different games, especially stuff that maybe they're not familiar with or haven't really heard about, that, like Air War.
Right.
Because not many people would know about it, but it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. And it's one of those games that I think others would enjoy as well. And, if we could do a quick review, we could talk about that later, obviously offline, but maybe that's something people would be interested in, is some kind of, review from us saying, hey, have you seen this game? This is how it plays. This is what we think of it. So just keep us planting the seed in the back of your minds.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We did an episode of this when we reviewed and went through Sangan, didn't we?
Yeah.
So, it's there. So, yeah, it's definitely something to think about, especially picking not so much obscure games, because, Air War's on the platform Wargamer, the same as Drive-Thru. It's the Wargamer version of that. So it is there. It's something that none of us would have even possibly looked at had we not been covering, say, the Falklands or something that has.
Right.
an air war component to it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, between the more popular systems, and then, when we just, like in Jim's case, researching Falklands and comes across this game, that it definitely merits us doing a review and saying, hey, you should check this game out. Or if some big games comes across, I'm like, ooh, I think part of our responsibility as journalists, as you will, or content creators, is to say, not to slam anybody's product, but to say, you may want to skip this one. Or if you do decide to play it, this is how I would recommend making it a better experience. You know what I mean?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are games that are going to require a little bit more legwork.
Yeah.
Yeah, full disclosure, Air War C21, these games go through multiple editions. And this happened in Air War C21. I was able to resolve it. And it seems to be happening again with Naval Command, is they'll come out with this game. It's, a PDF creation. It gets posted on Wargamer Vault. People download it, throw a few bucks, toward the publisher. Everything's great. And then a new version comes out, and a new version comes out, and a new edition comes out. Meanwhile, back, 3 editions ago, they released something for the Falklands or the Gulf War or who knows what. This also happened with Tactical Combat Middle East, the update for Panzerleader in the 1991 Gulf War and 2003 Iraqi Freedom. There'll be a new edition that comes out later, and you'll grab that, you'll download the latest edition, and then you'll download, the rules pack for the specific scenario, campaign booklet or whatever, and it's not even close. They made significant changes to the system. It's not really clear what edition that scenario pack was made for, and before you know it, you're in Excel and Adobe, and you're basically recreating the game yourself. And it's like, why did I pay money to download this if I'm just gonna, especially if you're somebody who designs most of their own war games anyway.
Right.
You go to a website, you pay some money to play somebody else's game. Take it easy on yourself for a damn change. And before you know it, you're wind up doing a lot of the legwork anyway. For Air War C21, it wasn't that big a deal. It was like one afternoon of work. And again, I think it was just mostly to bring an earlier edition Falklands supplement up to the latest edition, which is a lot better. They did make some big improvements. I don't know if it's going to be that easy with Naval Command yet. I'm still, the jury's still out on that one. But hopefully, obviously, hopefully we want Naval Command to work, because Naval Command brings in ships putting troops on the ground, ships fighting each other. You've got submarines, and you've got helicopters.
Excellent.
There are no helicopters in Air War C21. Air War C21 is all about jets. And you do have ships and ground targets, but they're represented in a very abstract way. It's like, you have to make a roll, and did you hit the target? You get X victory points for hitting the target. Can you sink the ship? How much damage do you do on the ship? But there's not like a miniature of the ship on the table or anything like that. Real quick, Air War C21 is usually played with either 1 to 300 or 1 to 600 miniatures. That's either 6 mil or 3 mil aircraft on a 6x3 table is the usual way that that game is played.
Wow.
For people who might be interested. Wow. The scale is logarithmic, but it's roughly 50 knots per inch of movement, and like 30-second turns or so. And what was I going to say? Roughly half a mile per inch. But again, the scale is logarithmic. So
I thought you translated it well to a hex encounter game. Well,
yeah, I put it on like a 2D like virtual surface so we could play it online. Mm-hmm. It does have a grid, but we are playing it with a ruler, so it's not really hex encounter.
Yeah.
I know, hex encounter is like almost synonymous with Oriskany by this point. Oriskany is like, it's got to be a hex encounter. No, it really doesn't. It's just that's really easy for a lot of ground systems. Air systems, where you can turn all kinds of different degrees for your turns. A hex system doesn't. There are times when a hex counter system doesn't work.
Yeah. Or
wouldn't work, and this would be one of them. So I wanted to keep this one also because I was, representing a published game that's out there, that an actual gaming company has come out with. I was trying to represent it as close to the source material as possible.
Cool. So yeah, that's definitely something to think about in the future. Doing some type of reviews for people. If anybody out there has suggestions or requests for different game systems they'd like us to take a look at, please mention in the comments or shoot us a message on our Facebook page. For myself, for hobby-wise, I've done a little bit of painting. I plan on this week prior to the show, obviously, I'm going to start working on one of the ultra-modern combat minis. I'll do that live stream. I did an impromptu live stream of Arma 3. Boy, I tell you what, I'm having the worst luck with that. So,
really?
Oh, yeah. So, I crashed an Apache, hit the wires.
Oh, gotcha. Yep.
I called in fire support. I don't know if anybody saw it, but there were several people on. But I called in fire support. I had 2 Apaches come in. They hit several targets, and both of them got knocked out of the sky. I had an A-10 come in. It hit a target, and it got knocked out of the sky. The Russian Federation anti-air teams are extremely, extremely tough.
I was going to say, what is there like a nest of shilkas in there? What is hiding in that village?
Well, the thing is, and I guess I can give away the secret at this point. So basically, the mission is you have a company-sized element inside this village of Russian Federation troops that you have to eliminate. When you get within a certain distance from the center, or in the case of air support, so there's like a circumference area of responsibility. Once you cross this imaginary border, there are a element of ground to air, what do they call them? Anti-aircraft teams, in about a mile or 2 down the road. And as soon as they cross that border, they activate and they come in. So you're hitting the initial target. You don't notice the anti-air until you're already on target. And then those anti-air engage you. So it's almost like you get ambushed.
Yep.
So it makes it tough.
But what kind of anti-air assets are we talking? We're talking about like shoulder fired, like SA-22s?
I'm going to go, well, I think they're shoulder fired, but they're also on BMPs. So I don't know. Is there any BMP mounted anti-air?
Not that I've ever heard of.
Okay. So this is all man-pad then at this point.
I mean, you could, I guess, launch the new AT-5s at a low-flying helicopter if you were really desperate. It's an optic-guided missile. You basically put the TV camera on the missile and you joystick it to the target. But that helicopter has to be pretty much sitting damn still and asking to be hit at that point. To my knowledge, there's no, unless things like the SA-8 or the SA-6. I think those are mounted on tank chassis. But I don't know if those are BMPs or not.
There's some pictures on YouTube, but the only pictures, on Google, and the only ones there are the ZU 23-2s. The
23. Yeah, 23-4 is the
23-2s. Yeah,
23-2s. Oh, those are like on the back of a 23-2 on the back of a BMP. Yeah,
that's the YouTube video of a ZU 23-2 on a BMP-1. It's live fire exercise.
2 23mm cannons, right?
Mm-hmm.
But no radar guidance.
No, it's not. It's
That's a ground support vehicle.
Yeah, it's basically they've taken the turret off the BMP and put a ZU 23-2 on the back of it. It looks like it was something like you see in Afghanistan, on the back of the tentacles. Yeah. It's that. And all they've done is take the BMP.
We actually ran across this in some of our Lebanon gaming. I brought in Israeli helicopters, and Rasmus had a technical with the 2 23mm cannons on the back. He's like, "Can I engage the 23mm cannons against the helicopters?" The answer is no, even though those are anti-aircraft guns, because they're anti-aircraft guns on the back of an improvised vehicle. So there's no radar guidance. The crew isn't trained to engage aircraft. That's anti-aircraft guns being put into a ground support role. And if that BMP does not have radar guidance, the big radar dish you see on the back of the Shilka, then I doubt it's going to be very good at engaging aircraft. Again, unless that Apaches just kind of sitting there looking for targets or circling or, please hit me, big sign hanging off the back of the helicopter, which I doubt.
No, they came in, hit target, and then did an orbit, and as they were orbiting is when they got hit. So, oh well, it's all part of the fun and research.
Yep.
So
you need to get some wild weasels in there and suppress that air defense first.
Yeah, there you go. That would be awesome. What was I gonna? Oh, news-wise, Ralph, you saw something recently.
Yeah, Stephen dropped some previews of 4 new greens for the next bunch of Spectre releases. They all look like, wow. In the pictures, they're all, the greens, so they're all carrying a mixture of Chris Vector 1s or Vector 2s, so they look quite nice as minis. And they could be classed as Mercs or PMC or whatever, because it looks like they're short sleeves, flak vests, stuff like that. I saw them and immediately thought, oh, Division agents from the new version of the Division 2, because that's set in 7 months after the original in Washington, D.C. during the summer. So, the sort of match there, just a little bit of conversion of putting like a rucksack or a sports bag on the back or whatever. But Stephen dropped them this week, so I know there's some work in progress shots of the new team on its way soon, so I'm assuming a month, maybe a little bit longer. But they look really nice. I've sent the link in to everybody so you can have a look.
Awesome. And I do know Tim from Footsore Miniatures now, with their new modern range. Tim used to have his own company, Special Artisan Service Miniatures, and I believe they've been folded into Footsore, right? Is my understanding now. He's been showing off some SAS, right? Aren't they SAS?
It's his SAS. It's his urban or whatever, urban assault or versions of them, I think, similar to the Spectre range. So yeah, I saw them. They look nice. There's a lot of moderns seem to be coming out. I know that Empress have been showing off their Vietnam range, which looks really nice.
Yeah, they do.
The Marines, especially the guy carrying the M79, sort of cocked, ready to be open, ready to be loaded. He's got an M79 ready to be loaded, and I think there's one where he's got it aimed, ready to be fired. So.
Oh, he's got a thumper.
But they look, he's got a thumper. Looks really nice. They look really nice as a set of minis, so that's going to be an interesting one because
I don't know if anyone. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish up. My bad.
Well, the interesting thing's going to be now that we've got Warlord moving into Korea. Yeah. So there'll be a lot of World War II / late war / possibly mid-50 minis coming out. I would have thought. Depending on what it is, so we'll probably get some Chinese, because I don't think Warlord have done any modern Chinese per se, because if you class Korea as a modern conflict, because it's post-war World War II, so we'll probably get some North Koreans, we'll get some Chinese, I would thought. We'll get vehicles going with them, which are probably going to be, Jim probably knows a little bit better than me, but would there be Russian armor with that lot? Or would it be Chinese armor?
In Korea? You're looking at the only ones I've ever seen are T-34-85s in Korea. So that's late war Soviet medium armor.
Yeah.
No T-55s or any of that stuff.
So does that mean once Warlord have done all they can with Korea, are they going to step forward again? Because that's been one of the big asks by everybody, doing Vietnam. Yeah, which means, granted, if they do it, that means we would end up getting a bunch of plastics that would be perfect for converting. Kit bashing together and stuff like that.
Before I unleash Jim, my thoughts on Vietnam. Well, even a 28 mil, it would have to be platoon to squad size. You couldn't go bigger.
No.
It's just the ranges, because you're getting into ridiculous amounts of weaponry. But again, you got to remember, bolt action is designed to be a period themed game, not a historically accurate / simulation game. So, but I mean, I'm all for a Vietnam era game. I would like to see Battlefront revisit Vietnam, all in full earnest at 15 mil or less. So that's my feeling on it. Jim, it's your turn.
Okay. I actually think that Vietnam would be a really good fit for bolt action.
Oh.
Actually, I really do. I think in some ways bolt action might be a better fit for Vietnam than it is for World War II. Because I've said it a million times, I'll say it 1,000,001. Bolt action works best, and I think it was originally designed as an infantry game. And of course, Vietnam is primarily an infantry conflict.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Also, with the cities, people tend to forget that Vietnam was to a large extent also an urban conflict as well as a jungle conflict. But between this urban setting and especially, of course, the more stereotypical jungle setting, the ranges are very short. This makes, again, this plays strictly to bolt action's strengths. Bolt action is a short-range infantry game with nice 28mm miniatures. At the Desert War Boot Camp back, I think that was in September, I was talking with Charlie from Warlord Games about the possibility of bolt action going into Vietnam and converting a World War II infantry system into a Vietnam infantry system. And we did talk about it, and they are serious about it. I mean, I'm sure we can't speak for the whole company here, but it seemed like they were serious about it at the time. And we talked about some ideas because, I mean, I've done this same exercise myself with Barry Doyle's Valorant Victory. I took World War II infantry-based, squad-based system, converted it to Vietnam, and I ran across all the issues that you're going to run across. The difficulties and the challenges and the opportunities as well. These are going to be the same things that they're going to run into when they have to do this for bolt action. So we talked about it. We'll stay in touch. I mean, who knows, if they're going to go through with this or if they're going to be looking for outside, opinions or whatever, but there are definitely ways to do it. It's not as simple as it sounds. And we've probably talked about this before on the podcast. There are some, it's not just giving everybody new guns. There's also some very serious dynamics to, casualty evacuation, the civilians, hidden movement probably for the Viet Cong or the NVA. There are definitely some things you have to work out. The whole idea of support weapons blows completely wide open.
Yeah.
So you've got your World War II squad, which was usually 8 to 9 men carrying semi-automatic weapons, and maybe one guy in that team had an automatic weapon. That's usually a squad-based light machine gun. Okay, well, you fast forward to Vietnam. There's no such thing as a light or medium or heavy. There's a general purpose machine gun now. Everyone's carrying around a PKM, an RPK, or an M60. Everything's firing 30 caliber, at least of those machine guns. Then you've got the Americans who are walking around with M16s, which are basically light machine guns by bolt action, definition. And you've got the AKs, which are, again, 30 caliber, fully automatic. They're basically everyone's walking around with a Bren gun. It's a 20 or 30 round box firing 30 caliber ammunition. And it's nasty. And that's their basic weapons. Then, there's usually at least 2 or 3 M60s in a squad. Marines organized in 3 fire teams per squad, and each squad had its own M60. The M79s, Ralph was talking about before, the M72 Law, the B40s that the NVA was using. These are basically Chinese knockoffs of the RPG-7. You've got RPGs, booby traps. There's a lot going on there. It's not just, hey, let's make up some new miniatures and come out with a couple new rules and give everybody better guns for, updating from World War II to Korea.
Yeah.
Victory conditions and, scenario design has to get a big overhaul. There's a lot into it. But, it's definitely doable. And I actually think it would work because of what bolt action is good at and what Vietnam presents. It might actually work better in World War II in a certain kind of way.
A couple of things there, though, Jim, as well as the thinking about bolt action now. You could almost translate one of the weapon types, because the Germans have got the M44. Yeah, yep. The 44. So technically, that's an assault rifle. Yeah,
it totally is. It's the father of all assault rifles. This was in the.
Yeah, you know what? So
this was in the 56. The 56 episode of SITREP. We said, look, it's for people who want to use bolt action in the Arab-Israeli wars. Don't just load up everybody with, I say, STG 44s, but that's the for people who like to play bolt action in a modern setting. That's what they do. They take the STG 44 and they use that as an AK, and it's close enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an AK, and you can tweak things like that. The other thing as well is, do you think with them stepping into Korea that is the starting point to look at bringing in more modern weaponry, shall we say? With looking, we're stepping in Korea, so it's late war, but there's going to be technologies coming in if they do more books that will affect that go beyond late war. So you're possibly looking at with them doing the MASH unit, and yes, we know that's a themed unit, based around the TV series, but helicopter, things like that. So the old, for evacuations and stuff like that. So I'm wondering if they're using Korea as a testing bed, if you know what I mean.
It would definitely be a first step. I would caution that it would be a baby step.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, a very, very baby step. I mean, they're literally dipping their toe in the. If they're, I mean, we're completely speaking as if we all work at Warlord Games, which obviously we don't. So complete conjecture on my part here. Disclaimer.
Everybody's conjecture,
Yeah. If what we're saying is true, and if Warlord is using the Korea expansion as the first step into modern wargaming, it is a baby pinky toe in the water to see just how cold the water is. It is a very, very limited and safe first step. Infantry combat has not really changed. We kind of talked about this in an earlier episode. Infantry combat really hasn't changed at all, meaningfully. The mix of weapons in the squad has changed a little bit more carbines and automatic weapons fire support, but the basic weapons haven't changed. M1 Garands, M1 Garand carbines, PPSHs for the Chinese and the North Koreans, SKS rifles. There's no AKs yet. There's no M16s yet. Really, that's it. Tanks, okay, you've got some Pershings and you have a handful of Centurions. People like to talk about the Centurions in Korea. There are a few, but we're talking about like literally a handful, like 5 or 6. It's not until you get into the air that things really take a big step up. Again, with the battlefield use of a helicopter in a non-combat role, albeit, but still, they were using them in the field. There was no such thing as a Korean War gunship, obviously. And like the jets. We see big time jet on jet air combat. But on the ground, through the keyhole through which bolt action is going to look at the way the wars work, it's an interesting step. It's a optimistic step. Let's hope for the best. But we should also kind of not kid ourselves. It's a baby step. It's a very, very let's dangle our feet in the water and see how cold it is. They're barely getting started.
Yeah, because I don't think there's been any core. There's stuff on Wargame Evolved that people have created, but I don't think there's been any system written specifically for the Vietnam, for that conflict. There's been for Vietnam itself. To game within that, apart from Battlefront doing it in 15 mil.
There's Charlie Von Surf. There's actually a bunch of systems out there for Vietnam.
What I'm saying is but they're not done by shall we say, an established company, because I don't think Charlie does surf. I've never heard of who did that. Where you've got like Warlord, Battlefront, Spectre, Sangin. The big companies, shall we say. compared to, say, the companies that seem to put out their PDFs and stuff that go off on Wargaming Vault and stuff like that, is what I'm trying to say. Is, there hasn't been somebody with enough money behind to promote it, shall we say, apart from, say, Battlefront, to try and get people to buy into their system, to use it. Where I think with Warlord dipping into Korea, that's going to open up people looking at it. And the obvious thing might be is if they start moving further and further into the Korean War, getting new models, getting new miniatures, and then possibly stepping even further. But that, it would be, I would think, at least 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 years off. It's not going to be an instant one, because we know Warlord will be concentrating on game books for their other systems. So you're going to have more campaign books for World War II. We're going to have possibly campaign books for Korea. And then take it from there. But I think it's an interesting one, and especially when they showed off one of the first sort of vehicles they're doing, which is the Centurion. So, a plastic Centurion. It looks really nice as a model. So I'm guessing we'll see what they actually do. But I think it's an interesting time now for all of the companies seem to be looking at modern conflicts or modern gaming as a way of expanding out from what they currently do. And I truly believe it's people like Spectre and Sangan that have sort of pushed the envelope to get these companies to start looking at that.
Oh, I would agree. I think if you look at now versus even a year ago, the amount of stuff that has moved towards modern, or companies that have started producing modern miniatures, and the amount of attention brought to it has grown. It really has. So it's very exciting to see that. Listening to you guys talk, I two things came to mind. I have two questions for each of you. The first question is, taking Bolt Action's new Korea system, game, whatever we want to call it at this point, what battle do you think would translate well for Bolt Action in Korea? Second question is, what type of battle or scenario would translate well for Bolt Action Vietnam? Now, we know it hasn't been even discussed outside of a casual conversation, but why I asked that is because when I was listening to you guys talk about different things related to how it, which surprised me, Jim, that you totally sold me on it, as far as Bolt Action being better for the type of combat in Vietnam. First thing came to mind is an A camp on the border of Laos or Cambodia, and running patrols, with your SF teams and your Montagnards, those type of things. So let me ask you the question. So for question one, Korea, what do you think, what battle or scenario would be ideal for Bolt Action Korea?
Ralph, you want to go first?
I'm just googling Korean War battles.
I hear keys coming in the background there. All right, let me jump in real quick. Again, everyone knows my bias. I'm not ashamed of it, but I'm going to go ahead and
actually, I've got one, Jim.
I would go with Incheon. The landings at Incheon, and that's going to be if you want to do anything amphibious. That battle gets insanely complicated, which we probably don't need to get into at the moment. And, of course, the Chosen Reservoir. Again, those are obviously both Marine Corps battles. Chosen Reservoir would be interesting to do on a tabletop because, obviously, that's very, very cold conditions. So, a lot of snow on the ground. People don't often, associate Korean War with snow. But trust me, there was a lot of snow. As anyone who was at the Chosen Reservoir can tell you. They didn't call it the Frozen Chosen for nothing. And battles like that. Those would be the specific historical ones that I would be the most interested in. But just on a personal level.
I've got another one for Korea as well, Jim. Chop Hill.
Oh, yeah. That's an army battle.
Yeah.
26th Infantry, if memory serves.
Yeah, but that's also a United Nations force. So you'd have, what's interesting is you would have a mixed unit. So you would have, say, South Korean, US, Colombian were there, Ethiopian and Thailand with all within that. I'm just looking at the battle here. So that would be an interesting one to see on the tabletop because it's got that mixed, deployment of troops. So you would have different units from different nationalities. That would be an interesting one to do. I'm going to
go ahead.
I'm going to go for Vietnam, and I would say doing parts of the Battle of Hue because I would love to see that in 28mm on the tabletop. I think that would look insanely good because it would also, I think it would remind people, and I could be wrong about Stalingrad, so because that was Battle of Stalingrad was all urban, so I think having parts of Hue on a tabletop 28mm would be insanely interesting to see play it out.
All right, so the questions were like, again, what I guess, and you correct me if I'm wrong, what specific battles in Korea, and then what types of engagements?
Yeah, whether you have a historical one or if there's a scenario that you think would lend itself well.
Well, again, I'm biased because of my background, but those are the two specific historical ones I'd be interested in. As far as a scenario type would go, for Korea, we were talking about this in a previous episode. The idea of the Chinese human wave attacks might be interesting to take a look at. You might even be able to do that solitaire. Make it almost like a miniature version of like a tower defense game. How long can you hold a given hilltop or something against like just endless waves, or like when Jerry runs his Zulu games where it's just like he doesn't have 5,000 Zulu figures. Mm-hmm. You wipe out the wave and then that wave just like respawns on the edge of the table and they just keep on coming.
Yeah,
that would be interesting to do, and some sort of casualty evacuation game, only because that allows you to bring in those first use of battlefield helicopters. Probably 99% of casualties in Korea were still evacuated with trucks and, mule carts and, all the usual ways back from World War II. But they were done also with, as we've all seen on TV, with those very early battlefield helicopters. That would be fun to do just as a point of interest. So that would be my answer for Korea. For Vietnam, okay, I know a little bit more about Vietnam. Vietnam, man, there's a million and one choices there. Specific scenarios, yes, we have done Hue that Ralph was talking about. I didn't do it in 28mm. I was doing it in 15.
Yeah.
But we did do Hue. One of the primary differences between Hue is a urban battle where you have a relatively low tech but very determined infantry force holding an urban position against a much more highly mechanized force. That's the U.S. Marine Corps, later the U.S. Army, going into Hue later on.
Yeah.
Okay. Those are the similarities, but the similarities pretty much end there, because one of the problems that the U.S. Marines faced in Hue was they were, much to the difference of the Germans in Stalingrad, was they were not allowed to use a lot of their heavy assets to really go in there and lay waste to a lot of the ruins and really blow the place to hell before they sent the troops in. In fact, in our Hue game we did for the article series a little while ago, every time you use an F4 Phantom Strike or one of the heavy cruisers that was parked just off in the South China Sea, however, you made your roll to call in the fire mission, you did the fire mission, and you rolled for damage. Okay, that damage was applied, and you blew up plenty of troops or whatever, so that's the good news. Here's the bad news. Whatever your damage roll was, that's also victory points straight to the Vietnamese. Mm-hmm. Because you were not allowed to use this stuff, blow up Hue City. Hue City was the old imperial capital of Vietnam from, back in the Middle Ages. It was a very, very important place culturally and symbolically to the Vietnamese. And for the first half of that battle, first 2/3 of that battle, there was a strict moratorium. You were not firing anything bigger than a law rocket in that town until finally casualties got so high that the Marines were like, look, I'm sorry about your pretty buildings, but guess what? we're wasting them, because there's all kinds of NVA and Viet Cong, both forces were used in there. So the whole idea of collateral damage and civilian casualties, the Germans in Stalingrad were absolutely not worried about that. The Americans in Hue City definitely were, at least in the first part of that battle. So you were talking about special forces bases near the border.
Yeah.
The one that I know specifically is Charlie Company 5th Special Forces Group at Long Bay in early February 1968. You've got that's probably the only time that the NBA used any kind of tanks, at least until the Easter offensives of 72 and 75. You got a special forces base overrun by like 5 times their number of NBA troops with PT-76 light tank support. So there's all kinds of differences there, or different scenarios there. What makes those battles strange for Vietnam is normally the template for Vietnam going into what kinds of battles you would run is either the NBA, PAVN, whatever you want to call them, or the Viet Cong / NLF, whatever you want to call them. They're hiding in the brush, or they control a village, or they control a crossroads or something, and the Free World Forces have to go in there and clean them out. So it's the Free World Forces on the offensive against a dug-in and hidden enemy. The Tet Offensive, which includes Hue City and Long Bay, sees the opposite. It's one of the few times that the Vietnamese, the communists, came out of the brush and came at either the Americans, the South Vietnamese, or the Australians. I think the Philippines were also there. Thai troops were also there. But mostly those are the 3 big powers that make up 99% of the troops in Vietnam. So yeah, those are the ones that I would look at as far as bolt action in Vietnam.
So while you were describing one of your battles, the battle I would choose based upon you used Jerry's Rorke's Drift as an example, and this is going to be early Vietnam. Pre-American would be Bien Dien Phu.
Then
Yeah. So you're talking French surrounded. You had French paratroopers jump in at one point to try and relieve and hold as much as possible. So I think that would be an excellent one as well, where you could do that same type of wave thing, because it's essentially you're holding and you have wave after wave of the Vietnamese army. They weren't called the NVA at that time. They were called
the Viet Minh.
Yes, thank you. So I if you want to go way back, you're talking post Korea. So 1954, I think it was. So
yeah, and Empress do a bunch of French Viet Minh troops.
Oh,
as part of that 28mm range, there was Empress were doing Viet Minh and French paratroopers from that time period of 54. With we're talking about Vietnam, and I'll point people towards this. If anybody's not watched it, and I do recommend it, is Ken Burns. It's on Netflix. Did a whole 10-part series, documentary series on the Vietnam War.
Yep, it's good. I watch it occasionally here and there. From
basically the French taking over it right the way through to the end of the war. It's an excellent series. I do recommend it. The reason I watched it, the reason I caught it was I was interested, but also Trent Reznor does the music, so I'm a little bit of a Trent Reznor 9 Inch Nails fan. So, but it was a really good series. But yeah, Empress were doing. I'm just going to double check. We're doing Indochina miniatures. Under they've got the Vietnam range. Yep, French Indochina 28mm. They've got a Vietnam range.
Yep.
And they've got a bunch of basically French and Viet Minh troopers in 28mm. So they've got them there. So if people wanted to start looking at that, because I'm guessing because it's 54 and the weapons are going to be more close to World War II, you could technically use the bolt action and possibly the Korean source book when it comes out to do French versus Viet Minh.
Yeah, possibly. You'd have to do tropical, so some of the equipment's going to be a little different than what was using Korea. There wasn't a large French presence in Korea, was there, Jim?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't think there was. So.
Once you say UN, UN involvement, it becomes a lot more diffuse as far as what do we mean by that.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there were some like French delegates there, French advisors, a big time French army that I haven't heard of it. I'm sure there was something in there though, but the big ones are definitely the U.S. and of course the South Koreans.
Well, it looks like Empress have got they've got four packs of 4 US, and I'm assuming they're Marines, but it could be US Army miniatures up on their website at the moment. So it's about £28 it'll be £28 plus postage for 16 miniatures.
For which war?
Vietnam.
Oh yeah, that could be either one, Army or
yeah. So, but so if you go on Empress's website and click on the Vietnam option, you'll see French Indochina. So that's pre-America's involvement, and then there's the what just is US Army, I think, or US Vietnam, and that's the miniatures that they've been showing off that are available now. And there's, like I said, there's 16 miniatures in there, so plus a set of buffaloes.
Technically, that's another war.
Yeah.
1945 to 54 is the first Indochina War.
Yeah.
And then what we call the Vietnam War, most of the world calls the Second Indochina War. Mm-hmm. That begins in, I think it's 62 officially. And America is really involved in it heavily starting in 65, 64, 65, gets out in 72, 73, and then the war wraps up by 75. Mm-hmm. But then that just leads to, Sino-Vietnamese War and the Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia in 78.
But they've got the minis up anyway, and they look quite nice actually. The US ones, they do look like a nice set of minis. There's a set of 4 which is basically it's a 1, 2, 3 basically M60s and a guy with what looks like an ammo loader. So they've got the support weapons as well. So there's a guy with a thumper and other things. So they're quite nice sets of minis. So
awesome. You know what? There is a movie coming out about the Anzacs in Vietnam. Danger Close, I believe it's called. Comes out next month. I've been seeing ads for it. It looks pretty good.
Yeah, someone put the trailer up on Facebook on the Modern Miniatures Gaming, I think it was. What was interesting was when you look at that, and then you look at how we're talking about bolt action in their minis. If you look at their Anzac minis, a lot of them are carrying the submachine gun that's in that trailer. Uh-huh. So it's a version of that. I think it's a version of the Sten. I could be wrong. So you could easily take, if you wanted to put Australians into a Vietnam setting, you could easily take, especially if they're warlords, and I know they're doing Commonwealth plastics, so you might be able to sort of convert and get some M16s and some M60s from TAG. The assault group do weapons separately, and you could put them in their hands and things like that, so you could do technically a modern-ish Anzac force.
Yeah, we're doing
conversion jobs.
We're doing Anzacs in South Vietnam tomorrow, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So by the time this episode airs, it'll have actually already happened. Mm-hmm. In Valorant Victory, obviously, with an Australian player. So that's going to be pretty awesome. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the rifles that they use. I mean, you might be talking about the Sterling, Ralph, as far as like a version of the submachine gun. Mm-hmm. I know some British units were using that as late as the Falklands.
Yeah.
Interestingly, they threw away their Sterlings and they picked up captured Argentinian FMs. Mm-hmm. And that's, it's because, I mean, the Sterling is like, it's a pea shooter, man. It's from 40 years ago. And the Australians, the Australians were using mostly FN Falls in Vietnam. So if you want to do a weapons conversion, we'd have to find some FN Falls. I think the British call it the L1. I think the Canadians have. Yeah. Okay. So there's a million names for it, but that basic .30 caliber sniper, not sniper rifle, battle rifle.
Yeah, it's one me father used when he was in the Fusiliers. He was in the Northumberland Fusiliers, and that's what they called it. They called it the SLR, the self-loading rifle.
Yep.
That he used when he was out in Aden. He was in Aden during the 60s when Britain were out in Aden.
That affects the combat values for our Australian units, and it reduces their firepower a little bit because it's only a semi-automatic weapon, but it increases their range because it's a .30 caliber round instead of the Americans spraying and praying with their 223 Remingtons at fully automatic and probably not hitting anything out there in the brush.
Mm-hmm.
Ouch.
Sorry. Hey, Marines were there too.
You know, we learned a lot from Vietnam. We definitely learned a lot. You know, I can remember being in basic in '86. You know, it wasn't spraying and praying. It was a lot of marksmanship, you know.
Oh, yeah.
So we learned a lot about trigger control, fire control, you know, short burst. The only time we ever got to fire, we got to shoot one 30-round clip magazine at the range at full auto, just so you could see what it was like. And then we got to shoot a 50-round belt on an M60 at full auto, just to see what it was like.
Nice.
And then after that, it was, you know, about 3 rounds, you know, a trigger pull. So, and then when the A2 came out, I don't remember did you have A2s, Jim?
I was just going to say, by the time I was only in 3 years after you. In '89, I was in for basic training, infantry school, things like that. And we only had the A2s.
And you only had 3-round bursts, right?
Exactly. There is no full automatic variant of the A2, or there's no automatic option. There's safe, single, and 3-round burst, because the whole idea of automatic weapons fire is, it's a waste. It's, you know, after your 5th bullet, I mean, who knows what you're going to shoot at?
Yeah.
Wasn't the sniper schools created after or during or before Vietnam because the US had dropped snipers completely as a viable force, hadn't it?
Actually, I don't really know.
That I don't know when the official Army or Marine Corps sniper schools started up. It was an option when I was in, because we had a couple people that went to sniper school. So I don't, you know, and then you listen to Carlos Hithcock, you know, the famous Marine sniper who made some incredible shots. So,
it was 55 when the sniper schools were started. So I'm assuming it was after it was 55, 50. It was established in 55. It was disbanded in 56, and then re-established in 87.
Really? Well, then there must have been.
There were snipers in Vietnam. I guess.
Yeah, there were snipers, and we had, like I said, I knew a couple people that went to sniper school. You know what? I got the division in '87, so they may have been one of the first rotations of people going through. But you know what? There were sniper schools at different divisions or units. It wasn't like the Army-wide sniper school at some point. Like, you know, at some point, I know there were several schools, like before jungle warfare schools started back up. See, the problem with the U.S. military, and it may be different for other countries, we're always playing catch up.
Yeah.
We base our current doctrine on the last battle we fought. So, you know, in our case in the 80s, we were adjusting to Vietnam. You know, we had jungle warfare school, we had sniper school, we had air assault school started up. You know, and then at the same time, we're also trying to, you know, during the height of the Cold War, address the Soviet threat. So
I was just going to say, that's the other thing, is that we're preparing for the wrong conflict.
Yeah.
The 80s was all about killing Soviet tanks in Germany. Good thing the next war takes place in Iraq, you know, out in the desert. You know, we were right on the money on that one.
Here's a question for you both, because you were both in the services. How you was later than that, but in 1980 when the SAS stormed the embassy, how shocked were you by that, or how was not so much shocked, but you know, we as British, and I remember watching it. I was 10 at the time when it happened. I remember the news cutting off for what was going on when you saw these guys clad in black, storming an embassy and doing that. Is how much do you think that played into the creation of some of the more modern special forces that we have now? So things like, I know Delta was created in 77, the SEAL team was created in before that and things like that. But how much of an influence do you think the British SAS had on special forces that are there now, like Delta, like the Green Berets?
That's a complicated answer to that.
That's a deep
there is, yes.
Yeah.
If the question is framed, how much of an influence do the SAS have on the creation of modern special forces? They're almost the granddaddy of all modern special forces. They're created in late 1941.
Yeah, the Long Range Desert Group. Yeah.
Well, they're two totally different forces. They did work together a lot. They worked together so much that people often get them confused. But they were actually two totally different missions. The SAS was actually the much more combative guys. But anyway, we're getting way off topic here. They're huge. How much of an effect that particular embassy raid had? Almost none. Because as far as the 80s go, the early 80s go, there's two main influences there. One successful, this is how you do it, and one terribly unsuccessful, here's how you don't do it.
Right.
And you have, GR knows what I'm talking about. I'm talking about
the
Entebbe raid.
Yeah.
The Entebbe raid in 1976. That is literally the template for every special forces hostage rescue mission that's ever taken place. SWAT teams, video games, cheesy movies. That's all goes back to Entebbe. Seriously, Delta Force. Watch Chuck Norris and Lee Marvin at Delta Force. It's totally Entebbe, and they don't even they don't even hide it.
No,
and then they shouldn't, And then the absolutely unsuccessful one is the Americans. The Americans at Operation Eagle Claw. Yeah, that's how you don't do it. And that took place. Well, it was the attempt. That was the basic. That was what 79.
Yeah.
Late 79. Yeah. So the late 70s show us two templates. Here's how to do it. Here's how not to do it. And I think as far as what special forces were going to look like in the early 80s, those were the two things they were really looking at.
So let me give you my 2 cents on this whole thing. First of all, I was 12 in 80, so I really wasn't paying attention to the SAS raid. And two, to be honest with you, it got a blip on our news here in the States. It wasn't like today. It was mentioned. I think there was a little bit of video, and that was essentially it. Because truth to be told, it didn't affect the American public one way or the other. Yeah. So, it wasn't newsworthy for us. Taking that aside, I just watched a show. It's a BBC show about SAS, and the first episode was the raid. The audacity that they, pulled off to do that raid was pretty ballsy, to be honest with you.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was essentially, we're going in, we're going to shoot the bad guys, and we're not going to kill any civilians if we can help it. Their main goal was to take out the bad guys, and if there's collateral damage, there's collateral damage. So from that aspect, it was pretty ballsy. Talking to what Jim talked about, the raid on Entebbe, definitely. The Israelis know how to do commando raids. There's no discussion there. They really refined commando. Then you have the precursor to Delta and the 160th SOAR, Special Operations Aviation Regiment, which came out of the disaster in the desert.
Yeah.
It was thereafter that the 160th was created, and SOCOM was created. And Delta was in its very infant stages. So it was after that they really started recruiting and training heavily. And I don't know if Jim's aware of this, but in the 80s, especially the earlier part of the 80s, up to the mid 80s, special forces was a dirty word.
Oh, yeah. It still is in the Marine Corps.
Honestly, which is surprising now that you guys have MARSOC, but and my dad was with the 12th Special Forces Group. He was their aviation's ops officer. So he was the one that flew, their version of a 160th. They had their own aviation assets. So he was the one that coordinated the aviation and flew the missions to get the guys into wherever they needed to go. My brother was a counterintelligence agent with the 12th Special Forces Group. So, I grew up with this, and to be honest with you, it was a dirty word in the mid to early 80s. And as, the scenario changed from conventional all-out modern warfare to more of the, ISIS and Taliban and all those kind of things, then you saw the value of having non-conventional warfare. So what did the SAS do for us? A lot of the stuff that the Special Forces, Delta, SEALs, MARSOC, even FBI, Hostage Rescue, ATF, any of the special operations groups take a lot from SAS. And to Jim's point, the Desert Group was not the true SAS. The SAS was actually the guys that were the commandos up on the North Sea, if I'm not mistaken, that were doing those raids and stuff up there.
Started off in Norway.
Yeah. So that was the actual birthplace of the SAS. The American Special Forces and now the Joint Task Force Canadians came out of the first Special Services, is it brigade or division? I can't remember. The Joint Canadian American Task Force. That is kind of where U.S. and Canadian Special Forces got their start before JFK officially recognized them in the 60s. So if you can't tell,
JFK, that's how the thing for the SEALs, wasn't it?
Well, the SEALs came out of combat swimmers of World War II. And then they were UDT in Vietnam, and then they became the SEALs late Vietnam. If you can't tell, Special Forces is kind of like my passion. So
I think it's all of ours in some way, shape, or form. The way that
so it's amazing to see the evolution from World War II to current day. So, but to answer your question, Ralph, the raid on the embassy, I don't know if it directly affected what currently happens, but it did show how things can happen and if they're done right. Because I think at the time there wasn't, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there was really any civilian casualties by the SAS. I think the terrorists hit one or two, like the policemen, right? No, or I can't remember off the top of my head.
Not the policemen. It was there was no civilian casualties caused by the SAS going in. The raid was a botch partly as well. There was one of the SAS members got tangled up, caught up in his ropes at the back. The flashbang going off at the front that caused the fire wasn't meant to be a fire there.
Yeah. Well, that's always the risk with the flashbang.
The flashbang caused that fire. But the main one was being the guy at the back was hung up on his ropes. And there was a fire in the back, if I remember correctly, because there's a couple of documentaries on YouTube from programs. So there's an hour and a half one about the raid. And he was swinging back and forth into the flames.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that was the front or the back when there was one of them coming down, but he was tangled up in his rappelling line, which was, shall we say, quite interesting. But yeah, I mean, supposedly as well, on something else I've read, is when they were rappelling down the back, one of the SAS members had put his foot through the glass of one of the windows. So, these things happen, but it was a little bit of a botch. But when they went in, there was no hostages injured by the SAS going in. It was when they killed a hostage.
Yeah. I think that's what set everything in motion.
The decision
at that point.
was made. It was the decision was made that somebody was that they were going in to prevent further hostages from being killed.
So a couple of quick things. Well, the Israelis, who at least post 1976 have kind of wrote the book on this. Even they dropped one of the hostages at Entebbe. I think there were 3 hostages lost, 1 left behind. Out of the 3 that were killed at the time, 2 were by terrorists, and 1 was unfortunately by one of the commandos. So as far as, the audacity that Gianna was mentioning, kick the door down, and we're not trying to hit any civilians, but we have to resolve the situation one way or the other. A lot of that also comes also out of entropy. As far as special forces being a dirty word, that is huge. I'm actually a little surprised to hear about that in the Army, but in the Marine Corps, that has always been a thing. And this is an institutional problem going back way to World War II, when they just outright disbanded the Marine Raider battalions.
Yeah.
Because the Marine Corps has always been petrified, justifiably so, that because we are our own branch of the service, but we do not have, and we have our own seat on the Joint Chiefs and so on and so on. There is no, just the way the American government is set up, there is a Department of the Navy, a Secretary of the Navy, Department of the Air Force, Department of the Army. There is no Department of the Marine Corps. We are part of the Department of the Navy.
Yeah.
So many people see the Marine Corps as America's second army, or the extra army, or the army that we can do without. Maybe we should just downsize them and just turn them into nothing but special forces. It'll be like the U.S. Marine Corps, almost more like the Royal Marine Commandos. The Marine Corps has always been terrified of turning into the Royal Marine Commandos. They don't want to do that. They want to remain as a full-blown branch of the military. And then as far as why the situation for all special forces, at least the American military, started to turn around in the 80s, a lot of that comes out of Grenada. So Grenada goes in 83, and it's a big success. The only thing that kind of goes wrong in Grenada was, again, this is after Eagle Claw. This is after all the American disasters. This is after even Vietnam. Everyone said, oh, we finally get a chance to kind of, expunge ourselves of some of the stigma or whatever. Everybody sent in their special forces. I mean, everybody and their brother was in Grenada in some degree or another. SEALs, Marines, I mean, who knows who else, Army Airborne, everybody was in there. And there were some friendly fire incidents because nobody was coordinated. You have all these, super motivated, almost too well motivated, I don't want to say trigger happy, but, gung-ho special forces guys in there that aren't talking to each other. Their commanders aren't talking to each other. In summary, what this leads to is the beginning of Joint Special Forces Command. Now, once you get that Joint Special Forces Command, to put it a little bit coyly, now you finally have some generals standing up for Special Forces. You finally have some stars on your team. And I think that's what kind of starts to reverse this stigma that Gianna was talking about, where Special Forces is a dirty word. Maybe Special Forces really does have a place in the larger panoply of, the American military. And this is even before the fall of the Soviet Union. Once the fall of the Soviet Union happens, now there's not going to be another big conventional war. Okay, we're going to get past Desert Storm real quick, but after Desert Storm, there's not going to be another really big, divisions and corps and army groups, open battlefield kind of a situation. It's all going to be low intensity, non-kinetic warfare. Where are those special forces that we had laying around before? We really need those guys now. Oh, they have generals on their, sitting in offices with stars on their shoulders that are really speaking up for them and really, as their advocates. So I think they had a rough ride in the 80s. Mid 80s, things started getting a little bit better after Grenada, and by the mid 90s, I think everyone kind of saw that special forces were going to be a massive player going forward. Special forces are never going to be the main thing. They can't be. They're just not big enough.
Right.
And there's always going to be a lot of pushback from the rest of the brass, because special forces are always looked at as, sometimes, they're so special that they're, sometimes looked at as undisciplined. This isn't what I'm saying about them. This is what, how other generals might see them, or how generals might see them. They're undisciplined. You hear all these phrases like, they act against the fabric and fundamentals of our military or whatever. We have 99.9% of our regular workaday grunts that are actually doing the real lifting here. Special forces gets all the glory. They're hot dogs, they're show-offs, they're hot shots. There's always going to be that bit of a pushback. I think that's where I think some of that special forces is a dirty word comes from. And I don't think it's ever going to completely go away. And I think that's where it comes from.
Yeah, you have your conventional generals who look at these guys, and you're right. They can be unorthodox.
They grow beards, they wear sneakers,
they have long hair,
clothes,
they don't have to wear uniforms, they get all the best equipment, they get all this stuff first, yada, yada, yada. It goes on, and then you'll hear the guys in the special ops community going, these guys don't know what they're talking about. It's a two-way street. So there's a time and a place for each. Special operations troops are a tool. They're a surgical tool. They're not, a broadcasted like weed killer. They are a surgical tool used for a specific purpose. And what we've been experiencing over the last few years is that in some cases they're using spec ops troops in an inappropriate way. They're in a way they weren't designed to be. They're
trying to cut down a tree with a surgical scalpel.
Exactly. So, that's the thing. I think it's not as bad as it used to be because now the people that are in higher level of command understand the purpose and the use of special operations troops. So, the old school, the old horse cavalry, if you will, is, has either left the building or is on their way out. And the people that are now in those positions have grown up with special operations, being in the mix.
Or after the war on terror, they just straight out changed their mind.
Yeah, exactly. So it is a whole new world for them, which has led to a whole new world of gaming for us.
It has indeed. When I think it was Ben on OTT was talking about putting out your own sort of getting in touch with them with ideas for buildings. Like we know Jerry's getting his updated Rock's Drift. Yep. And I think you had a conversation with Ben, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
About the about doing was it Mogadishu?
Yep.
It was the hotel, wasn't it?
Yeah.
One of the other ones was we'll reach out and go, Ben, we need a 4-story embassy building,
Yeah.
28 millimeter, It looks like a little bit of a townhouse, but it needs to be 4 stories. Have this, there you go, and that type of thing. Because those type of scenarios, lend themselves really well. I mean, you look at video gaming, especially the first Modern Warfare by Infinity Ward for Call of Duty. The very first mission you do, the introductory mission, after you've done this is how you move around, this is how you shoot your gun, that type of thing, is the raid on a tanker. And the tanker could be that one that was done by Blacksite.
Awesome.
You could easily run that as a gaming operation on attack a tanker on the middle of the North Sea. So from a point of view of the game, you pick any game system, but then you could throw in your own custom rules to do with weather type of, the sea being having an effect, so the ship bouncing up and down, causing, difficulty to hit targets and things like that. Not that it would really, but it would be type of thing that you could put in the mission in the game. It's chucking it down with rain, so you've got a slippy deck, things like that, where environment is affecting what you're actually doing within that. And so there's lots of things that we can as gamers bring into from talking about, looking at special forces operations, looking at things where special forces are mentioned, reading books and things like that, and just pushing it forward. Like I said, an idea for a scenario with these Spetsnaz I'm busy painting up would be they're an advanced force for an invading Russian force into one of the many Eastern European states in the news at the moment. So
that was their big role in Afghanistan.
Yeah. So the Russian force, these modern Russian special forces are attacking and trying to take out an early warning system. There's a scenario.
How about special forces on the back of a glacier?
Back of a glacier.
We have SAS troops in South Georgia. The beginning of the Falklands War, they tried to land 2 helicopters on a glacier. It didn't go so well.
Okay.
But especially talk about like ideas for special forces scenarios, and you're damn near unlimited. Yeah. And not even talking about like hypothetical scenarios. Like you read enough history, you'll find where special forces have been charged to do just about everything.
Excellent. All right, guys. Well, we're just about out of time for this show. Any final thoughts?
No, I'm good.
Awesome. Ralph?
I'm all good.
All right.
I'm all good, yep.
All right. So out there, we want to thank all our Patreon supporters for continuing to support our channel. Be on the lookout for the next episode of the Op Center. What is the next episode, Jim?
What is it on? It's on Air War, specifically in the Falklands.
Okay, perfect. And then look for an upcoming Let's Play of Spectre. I will run through a quick mission on the Black Site Studio demo board that I got from Adepticon.
Nice.
So we'll be filming that shortly. And then we're going to try and get back to our regular programming of our video game night on Tuesdays and our hobby time on Thursdays. The week following the airing of the shows when we'll be back on regular schedule. So in the meantime, for Ralph and Jim, this is G, and we appreciate you listening to the SITREP podcast. We'll see y'all later.